Jann Wenner, the founder of Rolling Stone magazine, has been removed from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This happened after a New York Times story Friday in which Wenner was talking about his new book, which features interviews with 7 iconic musicians: Bono, Bob Dylan, Jerry Garcia, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, and Pete Townsend. 7 white men. When he was asked and really pressed about why he only included interviews with 7 white men, Wenner said that black and female musicians didn't, and this is his words, not mine, didn't articulate at the level of white musicians. The thing is here, though, racism and sexism in the music industry, it isn't a secret, and it hasn't been one going back to the height of Motown and straight through to today. But it also begs the question that if this is the attitude and the approach of the founder, or begs the question, if this is the attitude of the host, of the founder, how many people have been passed over or lost out on opportunities because they missed out on the sphere of influence that was Rolling Stone?
It was really frustrating to read this article, and frustrating from the perspective of a music fan, frustrating from the perspective of a PR person
who has that perspective part.
Who has been there when clients have been there.
Yeah. Let's hear it. We don't often get the PR people's perspective sitting at this table, so we're gonna hit you up on a lot of those.
It was interesting in the first half of that interview. He talked a lot about how, in the interviews he conducted for the book, that he let his subjects review things and clean up mistakes. I found that wildly ironic in light of what's happened. And so you could imagine that when you're prepping someone for an interview like that, that's an obvious question that in this day and age a good journalist is going to ask. You need to have a good answer. And to me, at a certain point, the answer is probably something like, these were my good friends, and these are historic interviews, and these are all people who have earned their way through. That's not to make... I still think that that's a problem for the book personally, but that's the answer that you give. And it's not a complicated one. And it's still problematic, but that's the truth.
The other thing that really shocked me was it was clear that somebody in the editing process had flagged this problem for Wenner and said, dude, you don't have any women or people of color in this mix, because it mentioned, I think in the interview, that he addressed it even in the foreword of the book. So it was on his radar screen that, and here I'm talking about the omission of women and people of color, not the letting people doctor their interviews. But he knew that was out there.
How does
and why would you not be better prepared? I mean, what would you tell as a PR person? What would you tell a person going into an interview with the New York Times to say? I mean, how would you prep them for that?
Because clearly you would have anticipated the question.
Yes,
it's in the book, so he knows that's a problem.
You have to. I think you come back to what's the rationale for Rolling Stone being the way it was then? And I think you frame it as part of the past. And this is, since a lot of those interviews are historic anyway, it's an artifact. And history doesn't have to include everything all of the time. And so that's my best answer. I still don't like it.
And that's still an answer as a journalist I would have accepted.
Yeah.
With the addition of, and just wait for volume 2.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, because he has enough content to write how many other books where it could be 7 women. It could be 7 bands or musicians who are black. It could then be a 4th volume of Latinx musicians. Like, there's enough, again, as a historical artifact. Okay, go ahead. I'll let you keep going.
And in the interview, he even mentioned, he said, well, I wouldn't want to do it just for PR, right? I wouldn't want to include them just because PR thinks it's a good idea, which I found incredibly insulting. That obviously, like, this is a PR problem because it's a real problem, because there is a history of leaving people out. And again, I think in a sense, I'm glad that we know that this is how Rolling Stone was run for a long time, and I think that gives us some space from which to reevaluate things, and it shows us where some of those blind spots have been. Not to say that Rolling Stone hasn't done great writing in a lot of ways over many, many, many decades, right? They're still an important venue, but it undermines a lot of what we see and a lot of the prioritization of certain artists. Again, it has excluded people for decades.
Yes, and I think that's a great point, that it really highlights that. The other thing is, but speaking of handling a PR crisis, Wenner's son immediately repudiated what his dad said. I mean, said, I love him very much, but no, because the son is now running Rolling Stone. And so he can't have that on his plate. And so, I mean...
I wasn't surprised to see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame do what they did. Yeah.
How do they not?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.